December 19th, 1843. A man sits alone in his study in London, desperately writing. He has 6 weeks to finish a book. If he fails, his family will be thrown into the streets. He's already seen debtors' prison destroy his childhood. He can't let it happen again. He writes for 18 hours a day, barely sleeping, barely eating. His hand cramps, his eyes burn. But he keeps writing, because this isn't just any book. This is a story about ghosts, about redemption, about a miser who learns the meaning of Christmas. The book is called A Christmas Carol, and the man writing it is Charles Dickens. What he doesn't know yet is that this desperate act, this book written in panic and poverty, will change Christmas forever. It will transform how the entire world celebrates the holiday. It will create traditions that billions of people still follow today, 180 years later. But the story of how Charles Dickens invented modern Christmas, it starts long before that desperate night in 1843. It starts in a factory where a 12-year-old boy worked 10 hours a day, pasting labels on bottles of shoe polish, believing he would never escape. This is the story of the man who saved Christmas. But it's also the story of a man haunted by his past, obsessed with performance, driven by demons he could never outrun. And in the end, those same demons would kill him. Charles John Huffam Dickens was born on February 7, 1812, in Portsmouth, England. It was the height of the Industrial Revolution. Britain was transforming from farmland to factories, from villages to cities. Fortunes were being made. But for most people, life was brutal, short, and desperate. Charles's father, John Dickens, was a clerk in the Navy pay office. He made decent money, enough to rent a small house, enough to feed his growing family. But John had a problem. He loved spending money he didn't have. New clothes, expensive dinners, furniture they couldn't afford. He was charming, optimistic, always convinced tomorrow would be better. Young Charles adored his father. John would tell him stories, recite speeches, encourage his son to perform for guests. Charles loved being the center of attention. He was bright, energetic, always reading, always imagining. But by 1822, when Charles was 10 years old, everything collapsed. John's debts caught up with him. Creditors came to the door, demanding payment. The family had to move to cheaper lodgings in London, then cheaper again, then into a slum in Camden Town. Charles watched his family fall apart. Furniture was sold. Meals became smaller. His mother, Elizabeth, tried desperately to start a school, but no students came. The shame was crushing. In England, poverty wasn't just about lacking money. It was about losing your place in society, being seen as worthless, becoming invisible. Then, in February 1824, 2 weeks after Charles turned 12, the worst happened. John Dickens was arrested for debt. The amount was tiny, just £40, about $5,000 today. But debt was a crime in Victorian England, and the punishment was prison. John was taken to Marshalsea debtors' prison in Southwark. It was a nightmare. Hundreds of people crammed into dark, filthy rooms. Families lived there together because if the father was imprisoned, everyone suffered. Disease was rampant. People died there all the time. Charles's mother and siblings moved into the prison with his father because they had nowhere else to go. But Charles was sent to work. At 12 years old, he was sent to Warren's blacking factory near the Thames River. His job was to paste labels on bottles of boot, polish for 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. He was paid 6 shillings a week, barely enough to rent a tiny room in a boarding house. The factory was dark, rat-infested, filled with rough, uneducated boys who mocked Charles for speaking properly, for having gone to school. He worked in a basement, by a window facing the street, so people could watch them work like animals in a zoo. Charles was devastated. He felt abandoned by his parents. He felt his entire future had been stolen. He had been a bright, promising boy with dreams of education, of becoming someone important. Now he was just another factory child, destined for a life of poverty and labor. He later wrote that these months felt like years. The humiliation, the physical exhaustion, the feeling of being forgotten. He would walk past pastry shop windows, starving, staring at food he couldn't afford. He would wander the streets of London on Sundays, watching families together, feeling utterly alone. This experience, this trauma, never left him. For the rest of his life, Charles Dickens was haunted by the memory of that factory. He rarely spoke about it. Even his own children didn't know until after he died. But it shaped everything he would write, every character he would create, every story he would tell. After 4 months, John Dickens inherited a small amount of money and was released from prison. Charles was pulled out of the factory, but something inside him had broken. He had learned that the world was cruel, that families could betray you, that security was an illusion. And he had learned something else. If he was going to survive, if he was going to matter, he would have to fight for it himself. Charles went back to school, but only for 3 more years. At 15, his education ended. His family still needed money, so Charles became a clerk in a law office. It was boring, repetitive work, but Charles paid attention. He watched how lawyers manipulated language, how the legal system crushed poor people, how the rich always won. But Charles didn't want to be a clerk forever. He taught himself shorthand, a system of fast writing used by journalists. He practiced obsessively, hour after hour, until he was one of the fastest shorthand writers in London. And at 18, he became a court reporter, recording legal proceedings for newspapers. This was his education. Not university, not tutors, but watching real life. The courts showed him poverty, crime, injustice. The streets of London showed him prostitution, child labor, disease. And Charles absorbed it all, storing every detail in his remarkable memory. At night, he started writing sketches, short humorous essays about London life. He described street sellers, theater crowds, boarding houses, all the small details that most writers ignored. And in 1833, he published his first piece in a magazine. He used a pen name, Boz. The sketches were a hit. People loved his humor, his eye for detail, his sympathy for ordinary people. Publishers noticed. And in 1836, when Charles was just 24 years old, he was offered a job that would change his life. A publisher wanted someone to write captions for a series of funny illustrations about amateur sportsmen. It seemed like a small job, just filler text. But Charles saw an opportunity. He convinced them to let him write a serialized novel instead, with illustrations to match his story. The novel was called The Pickwick Papers, and it became a sensation. Each monthly installment sold more copies than the last. By the end, 40,000 copies were selling each month, unprecedented numbers. People gathered in groups to read it aloud. Pickwick clubs formed. The characters became household names. Charles Dickens, at 25 years old, was suddenly the most popular writer in England. And he was just getting started. Over the next 6 years, he wrote at a furious pace. Oliver Twist, about an orphan in the workhouse. Nicholas Nickleby, about cruel boarding schools. The Old Curiosity Shop, about a girl and her grandfather destroyed by gambling. Every story drew on his childhood pain, his memory of poverty, his rage at injustice. He wasn't writing simple entertainment. He was attacking Victorian society, exposing child labor, criticizing workhouses, demanding reform. And the public loved him for it. He became more than a writer. He became a voice for the forgotten, a champion of the poor. By 1842, Charles was wealthy enough to tour America. Huge crowds greeted him everywhere. He met President John Tyler. He was treated like a celebrity, mobbed on the streets. But he was also shocked by what he saw. American slavery disgusted him. The treatment of Native Americans horrified him. He came back to England disillusioned, but even more determined to write about injustice. But despite his success, Despite his wealth, Charles was not happy. His childhood trauma still haunted him. He spent money compulsively, like his father had, always afraid it would disappear. He worked obsessively, terrified of failure. And his marriage to Catherine Hogarth was falling apart. She had given him 10 children, but Charles found her boring, dull, unable to match his energy. And then, in 1843, something happened that pushed him to the edge. His sales dropped. His last book didn't sell well. His publishers were pressuring him. And worst of all, he was in debt again. Not as bad as his father, but enough to terrify him. Enough to bring back the nightmare of Marshalsea Prison. Charles panicked. He needed money desperately. And he had an idea for a story, a Christmas story. Something short he could write quickly and publish in time for the holiday. Something that would sell enough copies to save him. He had no idea that this desperate gamble would change the world. In early October 1843, Charles locked himself in his study. He had 6 weeks to write, illustrate, and publish a Christmas book. 6 weeks to save his family from financial disaster. The pressure was crushing, but Charles thrived under pressure. It focused him, drove away everything else. The story came to him fully formed. It would be about a miser named Ebenezer Scrooge, a man who hated Christmas, who cared only about money, who had closed his heart to joy and compassion. And on Christmas Eve, Scrooge would be visited by 3 ghosts. The ghost of Christmas past, showing him the choices that made him cold. The ghost of Christmas present, showing him the suffering his greed caused. And the ghost of Christmas yet to come, showing him his lonely, unmourned death. It wasn't a new idea. Ghost stories were popular at Christmas. But Charles brought something unique. He brought his rage at poverty, his memory of childhood suffering, his belief that people could change. Scrooge wasn't a villain. He was a warning. This is what happens when you worship money instead of people. This is what happens when you forget compassion. Charles wrote in a frenzy. He wrote during the day. He wrote late into the night. His family said he would laugh out loud while writing funny scenes and weep while writing sad ones. He was living inside the story, possessed by it. He poured his father into Scrooge's past, the charming man who destroyed his family with debt. He poured his own childhood into Tiny Tim, the crippled boy whose family loved him despite poverty. He poured his rage at Victorian society into the ghost of Christmas present, who showed Scrooge starving children named ignorance and want. But Charles did something radical. He made Scrooge redeemable. At the end, Scrooge wakes up on Christmas morning changed. He saves Tiny Tim. He reconciles with his family. He becomes generous, joyful, human again. And that message, that people can change, that redemption is possible, that became the heart of the story. By mid-November, Charles was finished. A Christmas Carol in prose, being a ghost story of Christmas. About 30,000 words, short enough to read in one sitting, but powerful enough to haunt you forever. Then came the problem. Charles wanted the book to be beautiful, gold-edged pages, hand-colored illustrations, a fancy cover. But that cost money, and his publisher refused to spend it. So Charles made a desperate decision. He would pay for the production himself. If the book failed, he would be ruined. A Christmas Carol was published on December 19, 1843. It cost 5 shillings, about $25 today. And it sold out immediately. Within days, 6,000 copies were gone. Reviews were ecstatic. Critics called it a masterpiece. Readers wept. Theaters started performing adaptations within weeks. But Charles didn't make the money he expected. Because he had paid for the expensive production, his profit per book was tiny. He made only £230, about $30,000 today. Not nothing, but not enough to solve his financial problems. He was devastated. What he didn't realize yet was that money didn't matter. Because A Christmas Carol did something far more important than make him rich. It changed Christmas itself. Before Dickens, Christmas in England was dying. The Puritans had nearly killed it centuries earlier, calling it a pagan festival. By the 1800s, it was barely celebrated. No trees, no cards, no family gatherings. It was just another day for most people. But A Christmas Carol reminded people what the holiday could be: family, generosity, compassion, joy. The book created a vision of Christmas as a time when rich and poor could come together, when redemption was possible, when love mattered more than money. Within a decade, Christmas transformed. People started decorating trees. They sent Christmas cards. They gathered for family dinners. They gave gifts to the poor. They told ghost stories by the fire. All of it, all the traditions we think of as ancient, were either created or popularized by Charles Dickens and A Christmas Carol. He didn't just write a book. He invented a holiday. But Charles couldn't enjoy his success because his demons wouldn't let him rest. After A Christmas Carol, Charles wrote 4 more Christmas books: The Chimes, The Cricket on the Hearth, The Battle of Life, The Haunted Man, all successful. All forgotten now, except for A Christmas Carol. But Charles wasn't satisfied. He kept writing novels. Dombey and Son, David Copperfield, his most autobiographical work, where he finally wrote about the blacking factory. Bleak House, Hard Times, Little Dorrit, A Tale of Two Cities, Great Expectations. He was producing masterpiece after masterpiece. He was the most famous writer in the English-speaking world, but he was also destroying himself. His marriage finally collapsed in 1858. Charles had fallen in love with an 18-year-old actress named Ellen Turner. He was 45. He separated from Catherine, sent her away with a financial settlement, and kept his children. Victorian society was scandalized. Divorce was shameful. But Charles didn't care. He wrote a public letter defending himself, attacking Catherine, blaming her for everything. His friends were horrified by his cruelty. But Charles was beyond caring about others' opinions. He had become obsessed with Ellen, with youth, with recapturing something he felt he had lost. And then he discovered something that gave him more joy than writing ever had: public performance. Charles had always loved performing. Even as a child, he would recite speeches, act out characters. And in 1853, he started doing public readings of his work. At first, they were for charity. But Charles realized something. The applause, the laughter, the tears of the audience, it was intoxicating. More immediate than writing, more powerful. So in 1858, he started doing professional readings. He would travel across England, performing excerpts from his novels. But his favorite, the one he performed most, was A Christmas Carol. He would act out all the voices: Scrooge's cruelty, Tiny Tim's innocence, the ghost's warnings. He became possessed by the performance. Audiences went wild. They laughed. They cried. They gave standing ovations. Charles fed on their energy. Each performance made him feel alive in a way nothing else did. It was validation, proof he mattered, proof he was loved. But the readings were physically brutal. Charles would perform for 2 hours straight, pacing, shouting, acting out every character with total commitment. He would lose pounds of weight from sweating. His pulse would race dangerously. Doctors warned him to slow down. He ignored them. In 1867, at age 55, Charles toured America again. He did 76 readings in 5 months. The schedule was insane. Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Washington, then back again. He performed sick. He performed exhausted. He performed through snowstorms and freezing trains. His health collapsed. He developed a painful foot condition that made walking agony. His left hand went numb. He had trouble speaking. Friends begged him to stop. He refused. The readings were his drug, his addiction. He needed the applause more than he needed rest. He came back to England in 1868 and immediately booked another farewell tour, 100 performances across the country. His doctors told him he was killing himself. His pulse rate after performances was dangerously high. His blood pressure was spiking. He was 56 years old and his body was breaking down. But Charles had one more innovation for his readings. He created a new performance, The Murder of Nancy from Oliver Twist. It was horrific, violent, terrifying. Charles would act out Bill Sikes beating Nancy to death with total realism. Audiences were traumatized. Women fainted. Men shouted for him to stop. And Charles loved it. The power to horrify people, to make them feel, to dominate the room completely. It was everything he had ever wanted. But each performance took more out of him. His friends noticed he seemed confused after readings, struggling to remember where he was. His left side was getting weaker. He was having small strokes, though no one knew it then. In April 1869, Charles collapsed after a reading in Preston. Doctors examined him and told him the truth. If he continued, he would die. His heart couldn't take it. His brain was damaged. He had to stop. Charles agreed to stop touring, but he negotiated for 12 final readings in London. Just 12. Then he would retire. His family and friends hoped he meant it. But those who knew Charles best knew the truth. He would never stop performing, not until his body gave out completely. On March 15, 1870, Charles Dickens gave his final public reading at St. James's Hall in London. He was 58 years old. His left side was partially paralyzed. His speech was sometimes slurred, but he walked onto that stage one last time. He performed A Christmas Carol. Of course he did. It was his greatest creation, his gift to the world. He became Scrooge one last time. He became the ghosts. He became Tiny Tim. And when he finished, when he said the final words, "God bless us, everyone," the audience erupted. Charles stood there, tears in his eyes, soaking in the applause. Then he said something that shocked everyone. "From these garish lights, I vanish now forevermore." It sounded like a farewell to more than just public readings. It sounded like goodbye. But Charles wasn't done working. He was writing a new novel, The Mystery of Edwin Drood, a murder mystery, darker than anything he had written before. He worked on it obsessively, driven by the same demons that had always pushed him. On June 8, 1870, Charles spent the day writing at his home, Gad's Hill Place. He worked through breakfast. He worked through lunch. His daughter worried about him. He looked pale, exhausted, but he insisted he was fine. At dinner that evening, Charles suddenly slumped in his chair, his face twisted. He couldn't speak. His daughter screamed for help. Charles had suffered a massive stroke. They carried him to a couch. Doctors were called, but there was nothing they could do. Charles Dickens lay unconscious for 24 hours. His family gathered around him. His mistress Ellen came in secret. On June 9, 1870, at 6:10 p.m., Charles died without regaining consciousness. He was 58 years old. The news devastated the world. Britain went into mourning. America mourned. Everywhere people had read his books, they felt like they had lost a friend. Flags flew at half-mast. Newspapers printed black-bordered tributes. The Queen sent condolences. Charles had requested a simple burial in a small churchyard near his home. But the nation refused. He was too important. So on June 14, 1870, Charles Dickens was buried in Westminster Abbey in Poets' Corner, next to Shakespeare. Thousands of people came to pay respects. The grave was left open for 3 days, so mourners could throw flowers. For weeks afterward, people visited, leaving wreaths, standing in silence, remembering the man who had given them so much. But what had Charles Dickens given the world? More than novels, more than entertainment. He had given voice to the voiceless. He had made the poor visible. He had attacked injustice with words more powerful than laws. He had shown that literature could change society. And he had given the world Christmas. Not the religious holiday that had always existed, but the cultural Christmas. The family gathering, the generosity to strangers, the belief that even the hardest heart could be redeemed. Every time someone says Merry Christmas, every time families gather for dinner, every time someone gives to charity during the holidays, they're living out the vision Charles Dickens created in 6 desperate weeks in 1843. The mystery of Edwin Drood was left unfinished. To this day, no one knows how Charles planned to end it. The mystery remains unsolved. But in a way, that's fitting, because Charles Dickens himself remained a mystery. A man who championed the poor while living in luxury. A man who wrote about redemption while unable to forgive those who hurt him. A man who created the warmth of Christmas while dying alone, driven by demons he could never escape. Today, over 150 years after his death, Charles Dickens' books are still read by millions. A Christmas Carol has never been out of print. It has been adapted hundreds of times into films, plays, radio shows, cartoons. Every Christmas, somewhere in the world, someone is performing it, reading it, watching it. The boy who worked in a blacking factory became immortal. The man who was terrified of poverty and obscurity created works that will never be forgotten. And the desperate writer who thought he was just trying to pay his bills ended up changing how billions of people celebrate the most important holiday of the year. Charles Dickens didn't just write stories. He wrote the story we all want to believe, that people can change, that redemption is possible, that even in the darkest times, there is hope, and that in the end, what matters most is not wealth or fame or success, but love, compassion, and human connection. He spent his life running from his past, trying to prove he mattered, terrified of being forgotten. He destroyed his health, abandoned his family, and worked himself to death. But he was never forgotten. He never could be. Because every Christmas, when families gather, when people give to charity, when someone says, "God bless us, everyone," Charles Dickens is still there. The ghost of Christmas past. The voice that will never be silenced. The man who saved Christmas